Okay, it looks like people haven't been tapped on the shoulder directly yet, but it's certainly in the air across parts of Tasmania's public service and planned redundancies, voluntary redundancies in the first instance for, well, according to the government's ambition, 1,700 people. It's about 5% of the public service. We employ more than 30,000 people across 18 agencies in Tasmania. So if my maths are correct, around 5% fewer over the next 4 years. And conversations are beginning around redundancy. Thirza White's the CPSU General Secretary in Tasmania. Thirza White, good morning to you.
Good morning, Leon.
I'm understanding that some departments, these conversations have already begun. What do you know?
Look, we know very little. I think this is another announcement that most public sector workers have woken up to today and are hearing through the media. This is how Homes Tasmania found out that they were moving to Building Tasmania. It's how Department of State Growth employees found out that their agency was abolished. We have a government that makes most of its announcements, not to its employees, but through media. And that's what's really disappointing in this, is that, this is not a new concept. The government has been talking about reducing the public sector first by 2,600 and now by 1,700. So I don't think any public sector worker would be surprised this morning that they are opening voluntary redundancies. I think what they'd be really disappointed is that, we're 2 years into this process and we still have no transparency around what roles, what agencies and what actually the government's plan is.
How strategic is it then in terms of targeting particular workforces or particular types of jobs that just won't be done in the future?
It's just not, and that's the issue, right? If you're going to cut this many jobs from the public sector, you have to be really honest with the community about what we're not doing. And I think it's important to realise this is a layer on a layer on a layer of cuts. We have already kind of had rounds of incentives for those who are, nearing retirement to leave. We've already seen some redundancies. We've got 250 redundancies in state growth, voluntary, and DCIP has already announced 110 redundancies. What we also heard from the head of the state service yesterday is that agencies are also using vacancy control, which is holding positions vacant, and that any agency has up to 10 to 20% of its positions vacant at any one time. So these are like huge cuts. Like they are huge gaps in capacity that will impact Tasmanians, and yet we have a government that continues to hide behind agencies and make it their responsibility. Like they're in budget estimates today. Every Tasmanian by Friday should know what this means. You cannot cut $1.47 billion out of the Tasmanian State Service without transferring the cost to ordinary Tasmanians, without actually impacting them in longer lines in service TAS.
So you're yet to understand about the strategic approach to this?
No, there's no strategic approach. Actually, what we see is the language changing constantly. Yesterday, we understood that frontline jobs will be exempt. They will not be open to EOIs. We have no definition of what that is. We have no list of roles. Is that what was considered a frontline during COVID or during an emergency? And this is the transparency that we need. Public sector workers are, will be very concerned, not just about their own situation, but also I'm hearing stories, from all parts of the public sector really concerned about what this means for service delivery. That they
Can you give me an example of that, Thirza White?
Yeah, so look, there are people in state growth where the whole team has put an expression of interest in, and the Treasurer said he will accept all of those expressions of interest.
As in an entire team that delivers an entire part of a program?
Yes.
Is that... We'll put our hands up.
Yeah. And, there are parts of state growth where we have, there are certain agencies, particularly state growth and NRE TAS, where there are people who do very important jobs, but there's only one or two of them in the state. Fuel security, eradication of pests that you've just talked about. So there really does need to be an analysis and a transparency with the government, with the community, and a conversation. Like governments get to make decisions in budgets, but they have to own the responsibility of that. And I think we need to zoom out here as well, right? This isn't just what's happening. So at the same time that they're cutting $1.4 billion and, they're cutting 1,800 jobs, I would also point to the fact that it was 2,600 jobs, and we can't get any clarity on how many jobs have gone in the last 12 months. They are also defunding the Tasmanian Industrial Commission and transferring that to TASCAT. Now, that's the place where public sector workers go to enforce their rights about whether services should be privatised or workload management, or even around change and consultation and making sure that their voices as professionals, who many have spent decades delivering services, are involved in what needs to happen in the next stages.
Tech questions and texts coming in this morning. You're welcome to get in touch. 1300 222 936 is the number. My guest this morning, Thirza White, General Secretary of the CPSU, the Community and Public Sector Union in Tasmania. Michael says they'll be oversubscribed for the redundancies. If you're close to retirement age, you'd be mad not to look at it, says Michael this morning. If you get a government rep on, says a listener, can you please ask if there'll be any caps placed on payouts, especially for long-term public servants? Thank you. What do you get, Thirza White, if you accept a voluntary redundancy? Is that clearly prescribed?
Yes, it is clearly prescribed. So it is a formula that is around the years of service that you've done, and so it is clearly prescribed. But I guess this goes back to your issue as well and your question about strategy. Like, I'm sitting in meetings with senior DPAC officials who are talking about the fact that we have a capability crisis and we're really struggling to attract and retain retention, particularly at that kind of middle to senior leadership. And now we're going to incentivise those who have been around for a really long time to walk out the door. Like, there is an absolute gap between the decisions of the government and the needs of the Tasmanian State Service to deliver the services for Tasmanians.
Brendan says via text this morning, please get out in the public sector and see the real world. You can get a tap on the shoulder any time, says Brendan. To Brendan's point about the size of the public service and acknowledging that we're talking about real people here and people with families and so on and responsibilities, the public service would have swollen by more than 5% just over the last few years in responding to COVID. I mean, if the government decides it can have fewer public servants, surely it has the right to seek to do that in Tasmania.
Look, I think it has the right to make those decisions. That's a decision of the elected government. What it doesn't have the right to is hide behind heads of agencies around the impact of that. And I challenge this idea about that this is COVID investment. From my members, what I understand is the majority of COVID investment actually became Commission of Inquiry investment. And if you look at the Commission of Inquiry, significant amounts of it were investment in the backline, because actually if you do not have people who are like in HR dealing with complaints, or you do not have digitised records, then you can't hold people to account. So, a lot of the investment we've seen is actually around the Commission of Inquiry. We haven't even finished paying out those payments to those people whose lives were wrecked by decisions that were made and catastrophic failures. We have an inquiry that has whole heaps of recommendations, and now we're going to gut the same workforces that we're invested in. So, these are the conversations that need to happen. But, I think we also need to be really clear that we're not here because the public sector has swelled to any great extent. We are here because we have a government that has made really poor choices around managing our finances.
To be clear, Treasury has actually said in one of its unvarnished opinions on, firstly, the broader issue of the difficult state of Tasmania's budget, it has also clearly said Tasmania has a public service that is larger than the state can afford. It's not just the government saying this, it's Treasury saying the state can't afford the public service.
Well, I think what Treasury says is that it's not sustainable on the revenue we raise. So, we're 3 years deep into this, and this government doesn't even have, I guess, the leadership to talk about raising revenue. I think every Tasmanian will give a little bit more to have a public sector that delivers services, because it's actually them who waits in longer. Like, we're now, Service Tas, for example. Service Tas is so understaffed that now in regional areas, they close at lunchtime. So when you want to go there at your lunch break, it will now be closed because they don't have enough staff to cover lunch breaks. It's not unusual to wait an hour and a half, like if you go into a Service Tas shop to get your driver's license. So, that costs us time. So I think it's about, and what we also haven't seen is that the government hasn't invested in the areas that raise money. Actually, the areas that raise money are now in the back line subject to cuts. So again, no strategy.
Mornings around Tasmania. I'd love to hear from you in the public services that's starting to be discussed in your part of the state at the moment. Have you been